Hello, everybody. Thanks for listening to the show. I appreciate all of the comments online. I appreciate you telling your friends about the show. Our numbers are going up, up, up. That must be because you guys are telling people to listen. So keep doing that. I appreciate it. You can subscribe to the podcast for free anywhere you listen to podcasts. I'm also now posting the podcast on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Tom Green. And the cool thing about that is we're bringing cameras in, and you're going to be able to watch the show on there pretty soon. I know I've been talking about this for a few days, but I've gotten lights, I've gotten cameras, I've gotten microphones, I've gotten all sorts of little technological things that I'm plugging in and switchers and all sorts of fun stuff. And it's going to be great. So that's happening. It's kind of strange being here alone in my house putting this all together during this pandemic, but I am. I'm alone in my house putting this all together. I'm ordering components and cables and lights and cameras off of the internet. I got this incredible light called a roto light, which I'm going to show you on the show. You'll be able to see it, but it really does a lot of cool stuff. I geek out on this kind of thing, but I like to talk about the technology because there is all sorts of amazing technology. When I was growing up, there was no way to even fathom the idea of building your own live streaming television studio in your house. So that's what I've done. In fact, in 2005, I guess, maybe even a little earlier than that, we built a TV studio in my living room here, and we did Webovision, which was my web show. And I've been taking old clips of that and posting them onto my YouTube channel as well. This week, I posted an incredible clip with Joe Rogan, who has gone on to do the most amazing things in this medium, in this space, with his podcast, which is now the biggest broadcast in the world. And when I posted it, it was a fun clip. It was showing Joe sitting up in my living room and I behind my talk show desk in my living room with our Skype computers and our wires and cables and lights and all of this stuff streaming onto the internet. We had people calling in on Skype, and we were doing shots, Joe and I, and doing shots and with our listeners and viewers who were calling in and having a shot with Joe Rogan and I. And it was really wild and crazy back in 2007. And Joe was so excited about coming on the show because he was very advanced with what he was doing on his website at the time, and I was really excited to talk to him about that. And we ended up having this really amazing conversation about the future of broadcasting. So I took this clip and I posted it on my social media this week, and Joe was just so gracious. He reposted the clip and gave me a nice shout out to all of his millions and millions and tens of millions, hundreds of millions of followers and fans. So just want to say thank you, Joe Rogan, for that. You are a real class act and an incredible talent and genius. So today on the show, I'm very excited to talk to another genius. This is essentially a scientist, a genius who works as a computational scientist. And I met Christopher Duncan when he was at my show at the Laugh Factory. I was doing stand-up comedy last year, and he was sitting in the front row. And after the show, I was grabbing a beer at the bar. He said hello, introduced himself. Turns out he works with satellites, he works with the military, he works with Raytheon, doing all sorts of top secret stuff that he couldn't talk to me about, but there is some stuff that he can talk about. And he calls in and we get into it. I thought we would have a conversation about, magnetic loop technology and sending drones to Mars, just stuff like that. It'll be an interesting show. Thanks for tuning in. Here's Christopher Duncan. Hello, Christopher.
Hello, Tom. How are you?
I'm doing very good. Thank you for calling the show today. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Oh, me too. This is an honor.
I'm not exactly sure if I am going to be able to understand everything that we're going to talk about, but I'm going to try. So a little bit of backstory. We met in Los Angeles last year when you were in the front row at one of my shows at the Laugh Factory in Hollywood. And after the show, I met you for a drink at the bar with the rest of the audience, and we had a conversation. And we started talking, and it turned out you are a genius, right? You're a genius.
I don't know that I'm a full genius, but I like to think I do okay.
You're a computational scientist. What is a computational scientist?
So the best way to describe it is a computational scientist studies the math behind natural problems like physics, the math behind things like anything like that, physics, astronomy, all the really hard stuff. We study the math behind it.
But you're not good at math, you told me.
No, no. I don't even know how I ended up in this field, to be honest, studying this.
But how does that work then? So what does that mean exactly? How can you be a computational scientist that's studying math, but you're not good at math?
A lot of putting my finger and reading the numbers with my finger under them, just like you would learn to read. It takes a lot of effort and focus for me, but...
So are you are you exploring logic? Are you looking for logical outcomes with things? Like you were telling me, and one thing I wanted to talk about today is you're studying magnetic loop technology. What is that?
Yes. So what I'm looking at is old World War II magnetic loop antennas, and I'm trying to repurpose them and pick up magnetic fields that normally... in frequency ranges we normally disregard.
Now, what is a magnetic loop antenna, first of all?
So basically, it's essentially just that. It's an antenna usually made of copper in some type of loop or circular shape that specifically picks up magnetic fields. It was used during World War II for communication and things like that.
And so they stopped using this, you told me. Why did they stop using magnetic loop technology, and what did they replace it with?
So magnetic loop and transmissions, they have a lot of unpreciseness to them. There's a lot of variables, and then they went to standard radio frequency antennas around World War II, the end of World War II, because it's more precise. You can get a lot of information. You can go to higher frequencies, and you can get it much more precise and clear.
So was magnetic loop technology forgotten?
For the most, not entirely, but for the most part, it's kind of been put on the margin or the fringe of science for the most part.
So you work at Raytheon, and what is the work you do at Raytheon? It's with the military, and you're looking for new technology and ways of using that for defense?
Yeah, so I have more or less two roles. I have my formal role is I'm managing several space programs, and then the other side of that is I look for new ideas and new technologies and help design new systems.
So this magnetic loop technology, you're exploring what it does and what have you found? What is it that you're going to be able to do with this technology, considering they stopped using it? They must have stopped using it for a reason. Is there something that can be done with it that hasn't been done before?
Preliminarily, yes. What I'm seeing is there's a lot of the ability to detect frequencies that we normally can't detect with a regular antenna and regular radio system because they're much, much lower and harder to pick up. And what I'm doing is I'm writing mathematical algorithms to detect patterns for things. And things might be cars, they might be space shuttle launches, earthquakes, light bulbs, anything with electricity or energy in it.
So I don't understand exactly. To detect things, so you're able to use this magnetic loop technology to, create a map of the environment and know where everything is? What exactly do you mean detect things?
We're not quite that far yet. That's an intent of mine is try to create a map. But I basically set up this magnetic loop and plugs into a computer, and we monitor the magnetic activity going on, and then we watch for specific things. Well, one recent test I did is I put a radio broadcaster inside a Faraday cage, which is supposed to block anything from leaving, any radio signal, and then we had it create a pattern of transmissions at very low frequency, and we were able to pick that up in the magnetic loop.
Sometimes I think I'm broadcasting from a Faraday cage based on my viewership and listenership. No, actually,
Yeah.
we're doing pretty good. We've got a lot of listeners. I just thought that was a funny thing to say. No, listen. So,
Well, you should.
so you're saying that what would this be used for then? Why would you want to be able to use this technology today?
So initially, one thing I'm really interested in is looking at the prediction of earthquakes ahead of time. It looks like there's some very preliminary research that says maybe this could be used to detect earthquakes up to 12 hours in advance, depending on circumstances. I'd like to look at planetary and orbital cycles. So do the planets and I know the answer to one question, does the sun's magnetic field and magnetic storming have an effect on us? Yes, that's the answer to that. But can we detect it ahead of time? Can we be more precise with it? Does passing Mars on orbit, does that have any effect here? Is it detectable here on Earth?
Okay, this is all very complex stuff. I also want to talk about something else that you were telling me about briefly, and we talked on the phone about it, and I said, hey, let's not talk about this in advance. I want to talk about this on the show because I like exploring these conversations live on the air and learning things live on the air. But you are involved with the space and satellite program at Raytheon, correct?
Correct, yeah.
And so you are wanting to do some work with Mars. Tell me about the Mars work that you're doing.
Yeah, this is more of a personal aspiration, trying to sell people, even the companies I'm working for on this, is I'd like to put drones on Mars. There's a lot of talk about sending people to Mars, and it's a very noble goal, but it's very far off. I think we could get drones to Mars sooner than we could get people.
So you're talking about flying drones flying around and mapping out the planet and taking pictures and kind of similar to the rover, but in the air.
Right. I think there'll be less issues with something in the air, and I think there are solutions to what everyone's thinking on that, and that's if you've been in the space industry, the big problems are power, storage, data transmission, and then there's just a whole host of physics problems like radiation and things like that. And I think the key to that is just making this very, very basic and putting a lot of that on Martian orbit.
I mean, you can buy those drones at the Apple store, right? You can just send one of those over there, right? Would those work?
I don't think so. There's a whole lot of variables there, and atmospheric density, and I mean, if you did get it there, it'd probably have like a 2-minute battery life. There's a lot of variables with that.
Oh, yeah. I figured there'd be something. So now, you manage the satellite program, though. Can you explain to me what that means, managing the satellite program for Raytheon?
Well, so I work at Raytheon Space and Airborne Systems, and there are a lot of Raytheon is huge in the civil and military defense community for satellite payloads. So a lot of the things NASA's putting up or the DoD or whoever, they're really the expert integrators on taking the valuable widgets, whatever that payload is, and getting them to work on a satellite and providing the data. So I manage a portfolio of probably about 5 or 6 of them, specific space programs.
Okay. You manage 5 or 6 space programs. Are you in the Space Force?
So I am not in the Space Force yet, but I'm an Army reservist, and I'm a space operations officer, and I will probably be changing to the Space Force soon.
Wow, so you're in the Space Force. Are you going to get a cool outfit and everything?
I think so. So I have most of the necessary accoutrements already, so I've already earned the space badge. So I think that would just transfer over.
So you're in Washington, D.C. area in Northern Virginia. You're working at Raytheon, which is, by many ways of thinking, sort of a mystery to a lot of people. People know about Raytheon. They know that they make military technology. But is it exciting working at Raytheon? It must be exciting.
It's very exciting. There's a lot of ups and downs with it, though. I think no matter how exciting it gets, there's always the slap in the face of normal business. Managing space programs is really fun, except for when you have to dig deep into the financials and you're down to counting the number of people you have on the program and what that costs and cutting and growing and things like that. Now, the part that excites me the most is when I get to sit on a whiteboard with a team of scientists and engineers and just throw a crazy idea out there. Like, can we put power on orbit and just have gigantic batteries on orbit that's powering things as they fly by? Well, let's look at the math behind that and start digging out the books and talking to the experts and writing it down. That's the exciting part.
You mean having like sort of like essentially like electrical power stations in the sky?
Yeah, and that was actually my idea for Mars. Is I would like to put electrical power stations and electrical sort of computer storage in orbit, and then reduce the drone to basically minimum. They're essentially a relay. They would take their navigation and sort of movement orders from the computer that is on orbit in Mars, which gets it from us. And the wings would essentially be some sort of like radio frequency or solar power. And the other, as they came out at a certain spot on their orbit around Mars at a certain time and a certain day, they would be essentially in receive mode. The satellite with batteries would blast down radio frequency, charge the drone for its next duty cycle, whatever that is, and it would go out, take pictures, and instead of processing and handling the pictures like a normal drone does, it essentially just hands off the data. It doesn't keep it or anything. It just throws it right up to a satellite on orbit.
So what's the process to try to make something like that happen? You come up with an idea. It's this huge idea, probably costs trillions of dollars, right? I don't know. How do you get that through the mechanics of the bureaucracy to actually make that happen?
Well, if there was an interest in that, what would happen? I would throw this on the whiteboard, get a preliminary sort of agreement from a team of scientists and engineers saying, yes, this is really stretching the limits, but we think this is doable. And then the not so much fun work begins of getting 10 to 15 people in a room who are experts in everything from the logistics and supplies to the cost of nuts and bolts, and figuring out a schedule from now for the next however many years, 10 years, and the cost and all the events that would have to happen between now and then, putting that together into a presentation, running it through various gates, they call them, for approval, that our cost is in the ballpark, and all those kind of things. And once we have that, then we write up a sort of proposal and send that off to somebody. And the powers that be, whether that's internal to Raytheon or the government or somebody else, they'll say yay or nay.
And what is the reason that we want to explore Mars? Is there a real benefit to exploring Mars?
Well, in my personal opinion, I think there is. I think it's almost a demonstration is what I would consider it. I like the idea of exploring Mars. I have my own suspicions on the viability of it, but I do think moving humanity into space is a goal we need to achieve sooner than later.
Why do you think human beings have always had this desire to explore and to cross oceans and to find new territory and now go into space? Why do we feel the need to do that?
Oh, man. If I could answer that, I think I would have about 10 more articles publishing in psychological journals. I don't know. There's a drive. We just got this drive. I've had a drive since I was a kid to go out and do all these things. So I traveled the world. I ended up where I'm at studying math somehow. I think it's inherent in all of us. For the most part, most of us want to achieve the next goal, whatever that is. Some people like to, play piano and they want to get better and better at it. Other people want to see the world and explore.
So right now you're managing satellites. How many satellites? You said 5 satellites or 5 space programs, you said?
5 programs, and there's a handful of, if I counted all satellites, I'm sure it's around 20.
20 satellites. So when you say 5 programs, what does that mean? Some involve satellites, some involve something else?
Some involve one satellite, some involve operations of satellites, some involve 10 satellites, things like that. And
so at your work, you are manufacturing these satellites, or what does Raytheon do? They actually make parts of satellites, or how does that all work?
So they make payloads for the most part. Raytheon, for the most part, is not making a full satellite, generally speaking. But they are experts at developing, for example, I don't know, if NASA wanted a picture or wanted a satellite that takes pictures, Raytheon would be one of the top competitors to develop the camera that would go on the satellite.
Are these like the cameras that you used to hear about when you were growing up in the 70s, where they'd say, hey, you know, they've got a satellite up there and it's got a camera on it and it could read your newspaper if you're sitting on a park bench in Central Park? Those kind of cameras?
So camera as in it takes your picture. I don't know that.
I remember they always said that when they were a kid. They'd say, there's a camera in space and it's has such a big zoom, it could read a newspaper of somebody sitting on Earth. Is that true?
I don't think so.
Wow, really? It's not true? Wow. Yeah, they made me think that they could do that in the 70s. I figured they'd be able to do something even crazier than that now.
Well, you know, if it were true, I wouldn't be able to comment on it. But
I see. Classified. Yeah, it's interesting. I sometimes think, because we're talking to you and you work at Raytheon and they obviously are involved with lots of classified stuff, I feel, oh, geez, are we allowed to talk about this? But we can talk about anything I ask that you're not allowed to talk about, you'll just say it's classified, right?
Or change the subject, but for the most part, I'm pretty brushed up on my boundaries. So.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. No, it's exciting to be able to talk to you and just to about whatever we can talk about. So what do these cameras do? What can they take a picture of? What is their capability?
Well, they take really good pictures. That's their capability.
Okay, that's classified. Yeah. So how, you said there's several 20 satellites you're working with. Are all the satellites doing different types of things? What are they doing up there?
Well, so 20 is a very generalized number, but there's, so NASA, like one area that I'm a big fan of is called remote sensing, and that they use a lot of different radio frequencies to map vegetation and growth and loss, and without pictures. So we obviously have the ability to take pictures because you can get those for free online. And then there are some remote sensing satellites which might, what they've done is they figured out what radio frequencies reflect off what, and they'll blast, like say, the area of the rainforest, and the radio frequency will only reflect off certain types of trees. And so then you get a mapping of those trees.
Wow.
And you can compare them. Yeah. So you get a comparison of how many of those trees were there last year versus this year.
How does that work? How do you figure out that a radio frequency only blasts off or reflects off one type of tree? And what kind of tree is that? I mean, for example, specifically, what kind of tree are you mapping in the Amazon rainforest?
I just broadly threw that out there, but for the most part, there are catalogs online of signatures of every type of plant generally. And it's so we're going to get real deep down the rabbit hole here, Tom.
Yeah.
Everything is some form of energy for the most part, unless the temperature is absolute zero, which we don't have anything on Earth that's absolute zero that I know of, is emitting some type of energy, and everything has property of either reflecting, absorbing, or transmitting energy. So a window, if light goes through a window, it is transmitting, allowing the light to go through, and it allows that certain band of the electromagnetic spectrum through. So now the glass window that you and I look at every day that lets the spectrum of light through, if you go really high frequency, there's a chance it might not let that through. We wouldn't be able to see it with our eyes because it's not in the visible spectrum, but it could be bouncing off that.
So everything has a temperature, is basically what you're saying? And you can read that? The energy is a temperature, or?
Well, everything has a temperature, and if it has a temperature, it's putting off some type of energy. And if it has a temperature also, there's going to be some property of reflectance. And for example, I don't know, what kind of plants do you like, Tom?
What kind of plants do I like?
What's your favorite plant?
Well, I mean, I could say, no, it's not the marijuana plant, but that would be a fun thing to say, cannabis right now, because it would sound cool. I don't know, my favorite plant, honestly, maybe garlic, actually. I've been cooking with a lot of garlic lately. Let's say garlic.
Okay, so let's say we're looking for the world's biggest treasure trove of garlic, and there's a field of marijuana plants. They might be really similar if you're looking at them from 30,000, 40, 50, 10 miles high, because they look kind of green. But if you look in this book of, years ago, some scientists blasted these plants with different types of energy. There might be a tweak that we can't see with the human eye, where maybe the red part of the spectrum on marijuana is slightly higher all the time. And then in garlic, the blue part of the spectrum doesn't show up. And so you could pass over the satellite, you bury it in this radio frequency, you collect all of it, it bounces up, and then you start sorting out those signatures, and you could say, well, it looks like a good mix of marijuana and garlic, because we're getting some hits here in this red where it's peaked up and some blue at the bottom, so that would be garlic.
So the military could use that to find out where the heroin poppy fields are in Afghanistan.
I suppose in theory that's possible.
Cool. Well, that's interesting. There's so much to talk about. What is the thing that you're most excited about right now that you're working
on? Honestly, the thing I'm most excited is my personal research as a computational scientist and trying to look at all these. There's so much. So the same way we're looking at in remote sensing, you've got this big catalog of frequencies and what they reflect on. Somebody's got to, if the research I'm doing proves to be viable, and so far everything I've done says it is, someone has to generate that same catalog for magnetic signatures. What does it look like when a diesel engine starts up?
Yeah.
What does it look like when a diesel engine is brand new? And what's it look like when it's got 400,000 miles on it and everything inside is kind of worn down and needs replaced?
And that's what you'll be using the magnetic loop technology to do that?
Hopefully.
Wow.
Yes, hopefully.
Wow. Okay. And so I'm just wondering what the practical application of that is, though. Why would you need to know whether a diesel engine with 400,000 miles on it was starting up versus a new one? And what would you use that for? And what would that be used for?
Oh, well, I wouldn't use that one practically, but I think there's probably some uses in the defense community. That's just, my opinion. I don't know. What we've seen some very interesting demonstration for on the civil side. So there's the earthquake type thing. What does the signature of the earth look like? And what does it look like right before an earthquake? Is there a shift somewhere in a fault line that produces magnetic variances and says, hey, something bad is about to happen? And then we've also got some very interesting sort of theoretical approaches on if a human, for example, let's say you're out in that marijuana garlic field and you get bit by a snake, it gets infected, so you got this big ball of pus on your leg. It's full of living things that are massed there, which all have energy, which means there should be a variance in your magnetic field at that spot. Like it should be hotter and emitting more, as things swarm there, like the bacteria. There might be more of a signature change in that. Theoretically, if you baselined a person, you might be able to detect growths or changes in mass and things like that.
So that's kind of like in Star Trek when they would go to the medical infirmary and they'd run a little wand over them and they'd see everything that was wrong inside their body.
Yeah, if we could get it to that level of fidelity, that'd be amazing. But for now, we're just testing.
So we're here in the middle of a pandemic right now. I haven't left my house in 3 weeks, and I'm doing this podcast every day. Are there any, first of all, what are your thoughts on the pandemic, on the COVID-19 coronavirus outbreak? And is there any of this technology that could be used in the future to prevent something like this from happening again?
Interesting question on the second one. My thoughts on the pandemic. The biggest sort of complaint I have is the amateur statistics. I think a lot of people are wanting to make this less serious than what it is. And people are wanting to read the numbers, but maybe they don't have the full background. And I also think the technical people that are your statisticians of the world and these people who know that they're playing with the numbers and models every day maybe aren't communicating it the best either. It really annoys me to see a lot of people downplaying things. And we have, in New York, they're digging mass graves at one point to potentially bury somebody. Sure, and I don't have the stats in front of me, but sure, the infection or the fatality rate might be, only whatever percent, 1, 2, whatever they say it is. But there's a lot of other things to consider. Sure, saying that using that as your sole statistic is like saying, I'm not going to invest $1 billion in whatever company because I'll only make 1%, but I will invest 50 because I'm going to make 100%. It's the weight is totally different. You're not going to make as much money, all these kind of things.
Okay. So are you feeling that this self-isolation, social isolation is a good thing? It's working? Is this a good thing that we're doing right now as a society?
I think it's a good thing. I wish it were taken a little more seriously. And, I'm not a constitutional law expert. I can't tell what we're allowed, so I don't know what we can and can't do, what the governor can and can't do. But if everyone could have just stayed home 3 to 6 weeks and just stopped, we probably could have put a hamper on a lot of this, now. Where I'm at in Northern Virginia, we're just starting to sort of hit the sort of exponential growth phase. For a while, we were having 50 new cases a day, and now we're somewhere between 150 and 200.
There's a lot of conspiracy theories going around about 5G is causing this. Since you work in magnetic loop technology and radio frequencies, is that just kind of hogwash? Obviously it is, I would think, right?
Yeah, generally it's hogwash. So, and I say generally because I've done research, but I haven't dug specifically in. And there's so many nuances to frequencies, but essentially you can lay out the electromagnetic spectrum. And I say what we're using because it's more or less infinite and it's way too long for us all to lay out. But there's a pretty clear line where it starts to become dangerous to humans. So like we were talking about
5G internet technology actually does become dangerous to humans?
No. Nope.
Okay. But once it gets stronger than that, it does.
Yeah, so it's actually shorter. Once we get more high frequency, things start to, as it passes through you, it starts to damage the DNA and cause all these other problems. And that's, ultimately the gamma rays from the sun are really, really destructive. That would, essentially burn you alive if you ran into that. That's basically like a Chernobyl level thing.
Yeah, because I've often wondered, if there is an increase in cancer in our society since we've started having all of these radio technology and television broadcasting started in the, in this century, and now we've got Wi-Fi everywhere, now 5G everywhere, cell phones being held up to our heads. I mean, all of these frequencies flying through our bodies can't be healthy, can it?
Well, so I wouldn't rule out that theory. But I think before we can delve into that, we have to control for increase in diagnosis just from increased medical. Like, we don't know how bad cancer was in the 1800s because there was no diagnosis for cancer. It was, you just had the black lung or the bum leg that was going to kill you.
Yeah.
So, and hopefully you took some opium and it was all better.
Yeah.
So we have to control for that. And then I wouldn't rule it out, but generally speaking, for the most part, I'd say no. I definitely think there's probably some out there that is unhealthy and maybe a contributing factor, but I think all in all, it's probably less dangerous than secondhand smoke.
I read a wild conspiracy theory today, and of course, I just am interested in reading these things sometimes because they pop up on my Facebook page, and you read it, and you go, what? And it said that this was a conspiracy, this whole pandemic, to get us to stay inside because an asteroid is going to hit the Earth on April 29th. Any truth to that?
Nothing that I'm aware. I have a conspiracy theorist or two in my family, and I make it a point to revisit things like why the world didn't end in 2012, I believe it was. And so maybe I'll see if I can get some of them spun up on that. And then after the end of April, I'll visit back and have a discussion with them.
What about Y2K? Why did Y2K not happen? Y2K?
Oh, I think that was a conspiracy for sure. No, I wasn't surprised. I mean, Y2K, I figured out it wouldn't be a problem because I went into my computer and I turned it to December 31st, 1999 and watched what happened. Nothing. So,
that's all it took? That's all it took to figure it out? And then instead, everybody in the media was saying when our computers reset, we're all going to die? I mean, and all you had to do was just try it?
Yeah, I mean, it's surprising. But then again, I was using a home computer. There's a whole different set of systems. And I mean, there's uncountable amount of operating systems that things are running on. Half the banking industry is running on COBOL, I believe, still. So maybe it affects some of those differently. I think there were some very minimal effects, but for the most part, it was hyped. I think it was a theory that someone let run away a little bit.
Is that really true? Half the banking industry is still running on COBOL?
I think most of it is still running on COBOL.
Wow.
If I'm correct. I may be thinking of the medical industry, but there's one of the major industries out there I was actually reading about is still running on COBOL.
Yeah, I just read a lot of the ventilators and a lot of the medical equipment. They need COBOL programmers right now. I know this because my father was in the Canadian military, and when he retired from active duty, he continued working with the Department of Defense up there in computers, and actually was a COBOL programmer for a while, my father. So I grew up around COBOL with the cards with the little holes in them that you'd run into the giant machines.
Yeah, wouldn't you hate for one of those like stacks of those cards to fall over?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Those cards were always lying around the house. Hey, listen, I really appreciate you calling in. I want to start doing this regularly. I know there's so much to cover, and in some ways, I wanted to just talk about magnetic loop technology for the whole show. But then I thought, it would be kind of fun to touch on a few of the other things that you're doing, and then maybe you can call back another time soon, and we can dive a little more deeply into specific subjects now that we've introduced you to the audience.
Absolutely. Hey, Tom, just consider me a mad scientist at your disposal.
Absolutely, yes. Well, Christopher, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Our in-house mad scientist, and I really, really appreciate you calling in. And yeah, we are going to launch that satellite too, right? You and I?
Yes. Oh, I wasn't sure how much you wanted to get into this.
Maybe we shouldn't. Maybe we shouldn't talk about it too much because we want to do it first. But we're gonna launch a satellite together, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. Yep. It was going to be a first.
Okay. We'll keep that between us, and just this general idea will float out there into the world. But we won't talk about it anymore until we do it sometime after this pandemic. Christopher Duncan, thank you so much for calling and talking to me today, and we'll talk to you again soon, okay?
Awesome. Thank you, Tom. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Tom Green Podcast, and thank you for calling Christopher Duncan. That was incredibly interesting, and I think I understood about half of what we talked about there. So we have a good show, though, coming up tomorrow and the next day and the next day after that. So tell all your friends to tune in. You can subscribe on youtube.com/Tom Green and watch the show very soon. You can subscribe on Spotify, on Apple Music, on Apple Podcasts, on Google Play, on all these places, Stitcher, all these places. So please do that, and follow me on Instagram at Tom Green, and on Twitter at Tom Green Live, and on Facebook. I've got one of those Facebook pages too, and we're going to be streaming on all of those very soon. But for now, keep listening. I appreciate it. Be safe. This pandemic is going to be over soon. I believe it. We're going to be back out there in the real world in June. Let's say it's going to be in June, okay? There's light at the end of the tunnel. Okay, folks? And hopefully it's not a train, but we will see. I think we're going to be all right. See you tomorrow. Be safe.